We're on a football field in a stadium, and we're surrounded by fans.
Hmm.
It quite felt like I was floating
Oh,
out there.
yes.
It was transcendent. And many of the people around me felt that too. And it was one of those moments where you go, gosh, life can't be the same for me after this.
Welcome back to the Blue Dragon Healing Podcast. Today we have with us Jeremy Van Wert.
Jeremy Van Wert, yes.
Van Wert, said De Wert. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a trained psychedelic guide, and host of the Mindful Mutiny podcast. He has some stories, cycling across America, leaving restrictive beliefs behind, and living authentically. Jeremy connects with audiences looking to break free and live with purpose. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been a long and varied life, a lot of different little stories in there.
I bet. So tell us about your background.
I was raised in the South Bay area of California, and it was kind of a nice, quiet life, if you will. In the 1980s, I was raised in the Mormon church. And as I grew, I became less and less interested in that and got more and more interested in music and started getting more serious about making an actual craft out of playing music. I'm a drummer, and I joined up with a local renowned marching organization that toured around and performed in stadiums. It's a very athletic thing, and I ended up becoming a bit of an athlete out of that. And after I left that, the drumming thing, I ended up getting into cycling and racing. And that's where the ride across America happened when I was in my early 20s.
Okay, so you said you were Mormon growing up.
Yes.
I don't know too much about the Mormon belief, but so you attended church once a week, went to Sunday school, anything else that you were required to do as part of that?
So the Mormon church is a very intense religion. And it's a religion where they work on scheduling your time so that you are going to church several times a week. And in high school, I would have to get up at 5 a.m. They call this seminary, and you go up every morning before school, you go to church. And
oh my God,
I'm a bit of a rebellious person anyway. And so the fact that I was required to go to church every single morning was a very unpleasant thing for a young man. The church hosts dances on Friday evenings and fireside chats and Boy Scouts. There's always something to be involved in. It's a very community-oriented church. Also ends up being really intensive for the people who are in it. It's incredibly hierarchical as a faith. You obtain certain levels and you climb in it, and there's definitely kind of a social strata to it that was something that resonates with some people, and it was just something that didn't particularly resonate with me.
So with all the memories you have of having to go to church, is there anything that kind of sticks out in your craw a little bit of a time where you especially didn't want to go, or an experience that you had there that really sticks out in your mind?
When I was 11 years old, we came to church one Sunday morning, and there were police cars in the parking lot. I remember that all of the adults looked very upset. And as an 11-year-old, nobody told me what had occurred at the church that morning. But I learned years later, because it's not an appropriate thing to tell a child, that the son of the bishop had unalived himself on the front steps of the church. And it was because he was struggling inside himself with his sexuality. And he felt that he was not able to live to a standard of conduct. That had occurred early in the morning before everybody had come to church. In my leaving this faith, I had to grapple with that happened in a building that I went to. And people were appropriately upset and they shielded children from knowing this. But this poor young man saw his life through the lens of something that he was dealing with inside of himself. And he saw his entire value as a human being tied up in this one set of things. I don't know his heart. I have no idea who he was, really. I just know what his name was and who he was related to. But he was dealing with something that was exceedingly troublesome to his mind. And there was something about that church that made him feel like there was no alternatives for him, and that he was up against living whoever it is that he wanted to be and making his parents proud or being socially acceptable. I don't know. It's just that that young man dealt with something that overcame him. And I just remember that morning, and it wasn't until years later that it was impactful to me, because that's when I learned that's what happened.
Oh my
That's what happened
gosh.
that morning.
Yeah. My own memory of church, I grew up Lutheran. Sunday school, I didn't like that very much, but what I really disliked was the full service with all the adults. And I would always find myself squirming and doing everything I could just to try and pass the time, scribbling things with a pencil and drawing whatever it was that I could. But the worst part for me would be the sermon. I don't think there was ever a time I ever went to church where I was able to actually sit and really listen to a sermon.
You weren't captivated.
But it bothered me so much being in an environment where people would recite things from a book without any feeling behind them. There's this song, The Flaming Lips, or an album, Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots. And there's a little bit of this, it felt very robotic being there and just not what I wanted to. So I can relate. So you said you went from church and then you sort of gravitated into music. Is
Yes.
that right?
Got really into drumming and
What kind of
toured.
drumming?
It was rudimental drumming, like marching band stuff.
Okay.
And it gets really competitive once you get to the higher levels. And I ended up being in one of the best. And we traveled every summer all across the United States and in Canada. And it was a very intensive experience. Lots of wearing 50-pound drums and running 25 miles a day. It was a very, very athletic thing. You have to be very strong and do this thing. And you're competing every couple of nights with these other drum and bugle corps and so forth. It was a heck of an adventure. It was really one of those things that fired my heart for the concept of being on an adventure, which really comes to define you. And of course, like for me with my little ADHD brain, I'm getting all these hits of dopamine all the time. Every single day is some new grand thing, which is hard to sustain through a lifetime. But it was a wonderful way of really understanding the capability that each of us have in our hearts. If you strategize, if you work hard, if you have a tremendous amount of dedication towards self-improvement.
So when you're doing all these things, kind of along the same lines as the church, is there a particular performance or competition that really stuck in your mind and your memory all these years?
You're asking really interesting questions here. There is. And there was this one particular night in 1997, and we were performing in a stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was the first time that I had a life peak experience, an actual change of consciousness. It took me about a year and a half of being in this group to become comfortable enough to actually go on autopilot during a performance, because I had always been concentrating so much. But on this particular night, we were just on. It was one of those great, epic, memorable things. And in that consciousness change, it's a very strange thing because there are no other shows that I remember. I remember this one. I remember doing it. I can remember it from beginning to end. It became kind of written inside of me. I remember the crowd being so loud that we couldn't even hear ourselves at certain points. The crowd
So
was really
you're
excited.
you're on the stage, right? Or can you
A
kind of
football field.
describe what it all looks like? What's the setup
Yeah,
for
we're
this?
on a football field in a stadium, and we're surrounded by fans.
Hmm.
We just did an amazing job that night, and my change of consciousness in that moment, it felt like everything was just simply spiritual motion. To
Hmm.
me, the entire world revolved around that moment in my own consciousness, and it was transcendent. And many of the people around me felt that too. And it was one of those moments where you go, gosh, life can't be the same for me after this. And that transcendence for me was, it was a spiritual moment. It was total escalation to the highest level of my abilities and spirit at the time. And it was
Hmm.
me kind of traveling in flow with my highest consciousness together in it.
Was there some form of cathartic integration that started occurring after the experience, like an emotional processing, a physical processing? What was that like?
What I
Hmm.
do recall is that I just felt like my life was on a different level after
Hmm.
having experienced that. But I didn't have the skills that I have now to know what was it that created that? How do you change consciousness and lift yourself? How do you sustain that higher frequency of your life? At the time, I was in the mindset of, wow, that was a magnificent moment. What a cool thing I got to experience. In my work now with consciousness and psychedelic work, I realize you can get to these higher level of consciousness. The real work comes in integrating that afterwards and going, I'm going to live here. This is my highest consciousness, and I'm going to sustain this in my life. And so that more of my life is in that high flow.
You went on this journey or adventure because you had mentioned that the music and that whole experience actually sparked this sense of adventure within you. And do you feel like that was an influential factor that combined with the awakening that set you on this motorcycle journey?
The short answer is most absolutely. The long answer is it's very difficult to create a life where you're constantly on an adventure.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and it's a heck of a lot easier to go, well, I'm going to get a federal job so that I can have adventures once a year for 2 weeks. It kind of get into this long flow of life instead of being able to actually access that. For a period of my life, I did the bicycling across the United States, got married, and I ended up settling near Sacramento and got a federal job. Started just working, 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 working to the point where adventures I'm speaking about felt like miles and miles behind me.
When you did go on this adventure, where did you go exactly? And what was that like?
The bicycle ride was from San Francisco, California to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It was all the way across the United States, about 3,500 miles. We were
Mm.
doing about 100 miles a day on bikes, and it was a group of about 10 of us that did it together. It was tremendously fun,
Hmm.
and just a wonderful experience of relying on each other, experiencing new things, meeting people along the way.
You knew these people from where that you went on the trip with?
We met in a chat room at the time, and all of us had wanted to do this, and we put this together for ourselves.
Chat room.
Yeah, and we went ahead and did this thing, and it was magnificent. One of those wonderful adventures.
you were going 100 miles a day, so then you must have spent quite a bit of time doing other things, right? Or you were doing things together as a group, or
Yeah, we'd if there was a sign that said knife shop this way, we'd go off on the dirt road and some guy would be selling knives in his garage. None of us were skinned alive, and so we ended up being okay. Somebody would have a salt and pepper shaker collection that they wanted to show people, and so we'd go see the salt and pepper shakers or the largest yarn ball or something like that. We would do whatever it was that would create a little bit of fun during the day.
hmm. So you're kind of doing little side adventures along the way, and then you'd eat together. What about sleeping arrangements? Like, how did you guys sleep at night?
We'd sleep in small hotels, but you had to time your meals right because all of us had zip ties in our pocket. And if you were the last guy out, your bike would be zip tied to a stop sign while the rest of us rode up the road. So if you were the last guy out of the restaurant, you'd have to go find scissors to unstick your bike.
Did you ever get caught as the last person?
Oh yeah. And it's super funny till it's you.
Is there any drinking going on then during this escapade too?
It was not good for the body. On the nights when there was drinking, it really showed up the next day
Hmm.
in the riding. You felt miserable even if you just had a beer. So there wasn't a lot of drinking. We kind of started off doing that, but it got in the way. And so we just stopped doing it because none of us were having fun doing that. We would do 100 miles a day. That was what made it fun because there was just hours and hours of pedaling where you could just really get to know the people next to you and chat about your life and what you wanted to do and things you were kind of dealing with. It ended up being a really good bonding experience.
Did you have a bonding experience that was uniquely more bonding than something you'd experienced before with a group of people?
It was just different. The drumming group was very bonded. We were all quite bonded. The cycling group wasn't exactly the same, but it was wonderful. We did rely upon one another. Once in a while, somebody would have a mishap, and everybody would be there for them. And there was a strong sense of togetherness and unity and helping each other get there. And if you broke down, somebody had the supply that you needed to get there.
Do you stay in touch with any of those guys
Mm-hmm.
still?
Mm-hmm. I do, a few of them, and this was quite some time ago. But we all want to do it again when we're 60.
Wow, that's a whole another situation. Oh my goodness.
I've got the zip ties ready.
So after the cycling, you kind of settled down a little bit, right? And got a job and that sort of thing.
Settled down for quite some time, ended up getting a master's degree in marriage and family therapy and started working as a therapist, doing community work and helping people, families, CPS cases, this kind of thing. And I was probably 7 years in to doing this therapeutic work with people. And 7 years in, you've kind of got it down. You know how to help people.
Let's talk a little bit before we get past that, because I'm interested to understand a little bit about what that's like. Entering this space, you get the master's degree, right? And you're all of a sudden you're a therapist for the first time, and you're doing, you said CPS cases, so some cases that might be more intense, you might say, right?
Yes.
So what was that like for you in the beginning?
Well, you're walking into a world that is very different than a world I ever knew. I'm dealing with people who I'm having a difficult time connecting with because they can perceive that I'm very different from them. It's not that there's any sort of lack of compassion, but it was difficult for me to at times understand what was going on in these people's lives. I had never
Mm.
grown up where gunshots were going outside my home at night.
Yeah.
I had never lived in an area where car theft was just something that happened on a daily basis around the area. I'd never been in this kind of area. I was doing a lot of these kinds of cases, and it took a while for me to, I think, really learn the kinds of things that these people really needed.
Were you scared, like initially going into these situations and dealing with this energy?
Less scared and more maybe disoriented,
Mm.
not understanding some of the rules and etiquette of
Mm.
being in these areas, and not understanding the kind of rules that there are in specific areas, because they have many of these places. There's a neighborhood watch going on. People do notice you there, and they want to know who you are. In many of the areas that I would go into, people would just walk up and ask me for a cigarette so that they could interact with me, see how I was, see if I was
Yeah.
defensive or anything like that. So I'd never smoked. I started carrying cigarettes. And so I always had a pack of Marlboro Reds,
Oh,
and
that's beautiful. That paints a picture right there.
I'd always have a light and a cigarette and talk with anybody who came up to me. And then I was cool, right? And and so, going to do CPS work, and I've got this pack of Marlboro Reds on me, and it ended up being one of the rules of these areas that I learned along the way, and I learned in what way how to lobby for these people, how to be an effective advocate for these people, because oftentimes they have their rights substantially violated by the system. Sometimes you're in a position to recognize in what way a child's educational rights are being violated because their needs are not being met in school, and this parent does not know how to assert their rights. And so you have to sit
Mm.
next to them and assert their rights with a school district to get the child's needs met in a way that the
Wow.
parent doesn't know how to do, doesn't know they have these rights.
So you would sit down with the officials from the school administration, that sort of thing, and
Yes.
like in
Yeah.
person, like all the three of you or four
Yeah,
of you,
there's
or
something out here called an IEP, an individualized education plan. It's a part of the law where if a child has learning problems, that you have to have these meetings with the school officials to make accommodations for a child that has a learning problem. And oftentimes the school officials, they want to keep the cost down on these IEPs. And so it behooves them to offer as little accommodation as possible for a child when the child may be in need of much greater accommodation. And so
Mm.
you have to understand how to press for that when a parent doesn't understand what their child even needs or that it's available to them.
So what was the secret to pressing for it?
Holding people's feet to the fire and getting rude when needed.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I ended up gaining a bit of a reputation for being heavy-handed
Yeah.
with the school districts because I recognized that for the first couple of years that I was getting snowed by them. And then I would get really irritated realizing how I had been manipulated by these school districts. So I learned all the laws and everything like that. And I would end up at times going into these things, and it would get very contentious
They're like,
with
Jeremy,
these.
the Bulldog's coming, guys. Watch it.
I don't like seeing people being taken advantage of. And some of the little bully Jeremy from long ago comes out in that.
Hmm.
And now I get to hold a principal's feet to the fire. That was kind of fun.
All right. So you were on this path for some time, and then where did that lead you? This role.
I was doing this. I leveled up into a local hospital that's a big name in this area. And one weekend I had a friend, and we went to a concert, and he asked me whether or not I would be interested in trying a psychedelic mushroom. And I had never done this. in my life. And here I am, a career-based 35-year-old, and had everything together. And I wanted to try this. I had no idea what this experience would be. And my friend was a very experienced person with this. And so I took this and we went to the Roger Waters concert out here. And it was a magnificent concert, just beautiful. I had this transcendent experience in the seat of this stadium that was beyond what my vocabulary could even explain. And the change of consciousness took me so much higher than anything that I'd ever experienced, including that day in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was swimming through colors. I was living in the music, and very familiar with this music, the music of Pink Floyd, and he was playing all of the greats. And I was having this totally mystical, beautiful experience where I was crying and I was flying through rainbows and in this music that I've always loved so much, but I'm hearing so much more of it and these intricacies, and thinking about my life as a healer, and that I felt in that moment that I was accessing such a higher level of my abilities that were completely absent in the work that I was doing. My work had come down to a lot of paperwork, a lot of meetings, a lot of trauma-focused CBT care. It's great talk therapy care, but it's very much a by-the-numbers kind of therapy that works on breathing and relaxing and relationship work, these kinds of things. And this was me having climbed Mount Olympus in my mind. I'm coming down from this thing, and we're in my friend's apartment having conversation. I'm saying, I don't think that my life will ever be the same after this. I don't know what just happened in my mind, but I have a lot of thinking to do about what my life actually is, because I feel like I just left my body for several hours, and I'm proved to myself that life exists outside of my body, that I exist on a spiritual level because I just experienced it for several hours. A level of bliss that I didn't even have the words to explain. One of the interesting things was coming home and sitting my wife down and going, Sherry, I have something to tell you. I used illegal drugs this weekend. And it actually went okay, because there was this level of newly found calm in me that she was pretty blown away by. This is not a toy. This doesn't feel like a recreational thing. I feel changed. I have a deeper sense of compassion for myself and for everybody in my life. I don't know why. I don't know what's happened to me, but it's a good thing. That's when I really started doing the research and rethinking my life, where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and my aims in life.
You described it as out of body. But was there any resonance in the body, to the heart, or something else that you felt connected to through that?
The music being the tangible thing that was coming into my ears created this sensory experience. I knew the music very well, but I knew the twists and turns that these songs were going to take, whether it was Breathe or Dogs or Wish You Were Here or any Shine On You Crazy Diamond, all these different ones. And I knew what was going to happen, but I was able to immerse myself so deeply in wonderful resonant sounds. And that sensory experience mixed with this newly found change of consciousness created so much more depth in the evening for me and moved me very deeply.
And so you started studying psychedelics and doing research on them, and you thought, hey, maybe I can integrate this into what I do as a healer or therapist.
Yes, and I'm also exceedingly stubborn. And part of the psychedelic ascension, when you're really working on your inner self, It is the letting go of your ego,
Yeah.
which I believe has been one of the most difficult things for me. I would have a weekend experience that helped me gain greater insight and greater healing. But I was also dealing with, where do I want to go in my career? I want to be something bigger in my career. And so I got an MBA, and I decided that I was going to get myself into leadership. I had 3 different leadership experiences that, now that I can see in the rearview mirror, it was me chasing my own ego. It
Hmm.
never ended up being a good thing. And so my first one, I was hired to be the hospital administrator of a psychiatric hospital. I was excited, showed up with my tie on the first day. They showed me to my office, which was literally a repainted boiler room deep in the bowels of the hospital. Like, I could see where the boilers had been, and they had just freshly painted it, so it was this hot box toxic mess. And I was like in Office Space, the guy in the basement that has the little red stapler. I was like that guy in this thing. And I'm,
Milton
yes,
from,
now,
yeah.
yeah. And so
Have you seen
I'm
my stapler?
I'm going to burn this place down. And that obviously wasn't something, if that was how they were going to be treating their people, I didn't want to stay there. And I hopped to the next thing, and I was a vice president of a social services agency. And you sometimes find out things about a place that you work at after you work there for a while. And there were
Uh-huh.
major problems of an ethical nature that were going on at this place, and I did not want to be there. And I left that place and ended up as the CEO of that drum and bugle corps that I used to be in. And yeah, it's an awkward, like, weird change of events. And I did this for a while, and boy, the self-satisfaction, the prestige, the ego stroke that all of that was.
The second job, the one you said that you discovered some things over time that were not very fortunate. Can you paint me a little bit of picture as to what those discoveries were like? Anything particular that jumps out at you?
In order to keep everybody legally okay, I would say there were lies. Lies that were dangerous to individuals that worked there. Lies that made things get swept under the carpet that shouldn't have been swept under the rug there. There was a lack of focus. It was a children's home. There was a lack of focus on the wellness of the children, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And I felt that the focus of the institution was lacking on where it should have been, and that leadership at the time was not focused on those things. The values were focused elsewhere. And
Hmm.
I'm sorry that I'd like to tell you specific
Hey,
things. I want to keep people okay.
yeah, I understand. You moved on and you became the CEO of the same music
The music group,
bugle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And mhm.
yeah. And I did that for several years. It's kind of interesting because these positions were diametrically opposed to the awakening that were happening inside of me, with this level of spirituality that was upgrading. I was feeling myself slipping out of my focus on my own personal ascension, because
Mm,
my focus became 80-hour work weeks, working all night, traveling across the country, answering the phones all day and night, and being focused on trying to do and be everything for everyone. There came a
mm.
point at which I could feel the physical health beginning to drain from me.
Yeah,
I
I bet.
I was unable to have a nourishing night's sleep. I was gaining weight. I was not
Mm,
working out. I was thinking about, what can I do to stay up all night and not have to sleep? What can I use to do that, and so that I can get my work done? I was placing my own health second to what I should have been focusing on. And it was all manufactured out of how proud I was to be in this CEO position.
did that put some strain on your relationships as well, doing those long weeks?
I had no friends. I couldn't call people back. I could return a text, but it placed strain on my marriage.
Hmm.
I was not able to get together with people who cared about me because I was always working. Christmas Day, I was working. And you would think, well, gosh, it's a marching band. Why is it that intense? It's a whole different story. But I ended up sacrificing my own personal health. And in the end of it, it didn't pay off. It wasn't something that was nourishing for me. It wasn't something that made a better me.
So, how did you break free?
Ended up getting into it with the board.
Oh, Jeremy the Bulldog came back out again?
Yeah. There's, yes. And so in the aftermath of all of that, because you never win when you go against a board. In the aftermath of this, I've had to take inventory. Okay, Jeremy, you've been a hospital administrator, you've been a vice president, and you have now been a CEO. Are you any better for it? Have you helped the world be a better place? And the answer was I wasn't better for it. And although I had this incredible gateway to this wonderful sense of elevated consciousness, I had not been integrating these ideals, this greater level of compassion, this elevation into my life. I was still chasing the earthly things, the ego. And that is just as plainly as I can state it. And so I decided, I know what I'm good at. I know how affecting the work that I can do is in the lives of individuals when I can focus on them. And so I have begun working with individuals to help them strategize their lives, their success. I enrolled in the California Institute of Integral Studies. I got the kind of the preeminent certificate that there is in the world of psychedelic therapy, working with the different types of medicines that there are, understanding the lineage of these medicines, learning how to hold space. And I did my first ayahuasca retreat that was an incredible experience of my own personal internal journey to come to be in total authentic oneness with me.
Who did you sit with? Where was it? That sort of thing.
I did this with a church called Pachamama Sacred Paths. And this church does these retreats all over the Western United States. I sat with one of their Humpeg people that came to do this. And it was in Truckee, this particular retreat that I went to. And it was an all weekend thing. And it was an incredible ceremony. There were different medicines that were given throughout the weekend to us in ceremony. And like I've said, the real work comes not in the experience, but in the integration afterwards.
Of course.
Because one of the issues with doing psychedelics and becoming a specialist is in, well, now I'm the expert. I have been to Mount Olympus. I now know all the things.
And you had your certificate too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
yeah.
got this certificate.
I'm really something now. And and to come to a space of, recognizing how this life is all about continual growth, personal ascension, and expansion of yourself. You cannot help other people to do this in their lives if you feel like you've got it all figured out in yours. And this has been a real healing experience that now that I am in the space of doing this coaching work, and I can do this coaching work obviously with or without psychedelics, the coaching can be something. I help people build strategic plans for their lives that are based on personal life, the professional life, the physical wellness, and the spirituality. Because we often become more invested in one quadrant, leaving the other quadrants behind. And it's often we get really invested in our professional lives, and then our spiritual selves fall by the wayside. We end up not being healthy, and so forth. So it's about balancing. What do you want out of your life? What are your goals? How do you get there? And if there is a need for spiritual ascension using medicine, that's something that can be talked about as well.
When you just got your degree and you were doing the work for CPS and you had to build some communication skills to be more approachable and cross over into different modes of thought, do you feel like that's been a boon to you now that you've carried with you into the work that you're doing with psychedelics and coaching?
The key word is empathy. As a young therapist at the time, I had a sense that, well, if these kids would just do what I say, then they'll have a good life. They'll kind of figure it out. And there was a bit of me ignoring the incredible experiences that many of these young persons had been through.
Hmm.
Because I couldn't necessarily relate to it at the time, I feel like I was unable to help them as best I could.
Hmm.
But now that I can recognize that part of myself, that missing piece of myself, that missing perhaps experiential compassion at the time, now that I possess better skills in that area, to me, it has made me a better and more compassionate person who can help people heal themselves.
Who has been the most influential guide for you on your path with making this final breakthrough into integrating what you do into this world of psychedelics and making it feel more aligned with yourself?
The person's name is Masadi, and
Hmm.
he is the developer of something called exponential intelligence. He's a gentleman who has had a number of near-death experiences.
Hmm.
While he was in these near-death experiences, he downloaded information and brought it back, and has begun teaching how to live the most elevated version of yourself. And this is understanding how to utilize the natural gifts that you have. I have the ability to feel people's pain and to see it, to look inside people and see their hurts. I thought everybody could do that.
Hmm.
And apparently people are not able to do that. And I've been working on developing this extrasensory ability that I have to
Yeah.
really feel other people's pain. And the focus that he has helped me with through his Healing Mastery course has assisted me in being able to truly empathize on a deep level with the person that I'm sitting with, and to
Hmm.
understand their journeys, and to also give them the right kind of push that they need, understanding the pain that they've been through.
Hmm. And you mentioned you went through a course of his. Did you ever get a chance to meet? Was it Masadi?
Masadi, yes. Yeah, I've met with him. I've had him on my podcast.
Oh,
Yeah. And I did a live event with him. I spoke with him for over 3 hours.
wow.
Yeah, and his courses have been really helpful for me, and I came from the Mormon Church. I have a real sensitivity to anything that's a little culty, okay? Anything that feels very top-down and hierarchical, and this is most certainly not that. This
Hmm.
is just a man who offers his knowledge and has abilities to read into you and see things in you. And his accuracy in when he has read me has been startling, shocking
Hmm.
in what this man is able to see. And so his encouragement, his belief that everybody has these gifts, and that we're living in a society now that does not help people develop these things naturally. You understand how to do your arithmetic, you understand how to fill out a college application, you understand the way that you need to dress when you go to a job interview, you understand these important things that hold society together, okay? But this development of your spiritual core is something that is often not taught or particularly focused on. It's
Yeah.
not helpful to an industrial society, I guess. It's just
No, it's not. Well, it could be,
right.
but the whole thing would change structurally. How did you meet Masadi?
My neighbor studied under him, and she was an
Oh,
acupuncturist, and she had these gifts, and she was doing acupuncture on me at one point, and she had worked under this man, and she grabbed my hand and she smelled my fingers, and she said, "Do you smoke?" And I said, "No." And she goes, "Okay, who in your family smoked?" And I said, "Well, my grandpa Tony, he smoked. He died of emphysema when I was 5." And she said, "Okay, he's here." And we're in a hospital building, okay? And now I'm smelling cigarette smoke in this room, and she's like, "He's here. He's always been with you. He cares about you. He guards you, and he also needs to go and do his own work. He needs to go to the light. He needs to stop following you. He his anxiety, because he was a World War II vet, is affecting you in a negative way." And what's interesting is she showed him the light. She got rid of him that day, and he came back. And other people that read me see him, but it's a different version of him. It's a healthy version of him. It's a non-wounded version. It's not an anxious version of him. It's not a traumatized version. It's a paternal version of him. And that presence, it's kind of funny when people read me, they go, "There's somebody with you. There's somebody with you." And I always go, "What do you smell?" And they go, "Tobacco." It's always that. And so she was the one who introduced me to Masadi, because this is how she learned her own skills in this. And I started studying under Masadi.
so you shaped your work from where it was into some psychedelic integration. So, what types of things do you work with people on, and what's kind of your approach methodically?
So it is legal in the United States to work with ketamine as long as it is prescribed by a doctor and so forth. And I do that kind of work as a therapist, working with people using ketamine, doing the treatment and everything like this. And occasionally somebody calls me and they have something in their hand that they want to take, and they want to make sure that they are safe. And so if they want to bring that themselves, give it to themselves, and I can keep them safe and help them. I do this work here where I live near Tahoe.
Mm-hmm.
My job is to keep them safe, to help guide them, to help integrate their experience, whatever it is that they want to take, as long as it is a proper dose of something that is pure, and you can test for this kind of thing. There's different kinds of medicines that can do different things for you. And oftentimes people want to do things like MDMA, want to do things like psilocybin. These are long experiences. And particularly if it's a mushroom, depending upon the varietal, it can be a 9-hour experience,
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I've certainly had those kind of long experiences too. And my job in this is to help them set goals previous to when they come. I understand who they are. I know what their traumas are. I know what they're dealing with. And that can be an addiction that they're dealing with. And they're really wanting to dive deep inside themselves. Sometimes they are wanting to understand why they are so anxious. Sometimes they're wanting to process a loss in their lives. Sometimes it's all of these things at once, and they want to do this with a trained person who has sat with people before. And my job is to ensure that they are safe, that they have what they need, that they are warm, that they are undisturbed, that they're in the right set and setting, that my interaction with these people is one that is nourishing and positive, and so that they feel positive about their experience. And that afterwards, it's not just you have a session and you go out into the world. I have an obligation to people that do this to work with them afterwards, to sit down the next morning and have breakfast and coffee with them and talk about their experience and help them journal, to walk with them in the woods near my home and to talk about where they went and what their lives are like now and where they want to go. And in the weeks to come, to continue meeting with them, to integrate their experience. And so that it's a nourishing, growth-oriented experience that helps them ascend.
How long do you normally observe the integration processes that you're facilitating? How long do they usually last?
I usually meet with people about 3 times afterwards. However, sometimes it takes more time. Sometimes people are working on something that's very deep for them. If that's the case, and I'll stay on for longer than that and provide resources so that the person can continue working on staying at that higher level of consciousness and integrating what it is that they learned from whatever it is that they experienced, whether it was guides that they interfaced with or just an experience of having their heart opened and being able to forgive themselves for something that occurred. What is even more is a part of a different package that I have is working with these people on strategizing how this can change your life in many ways and writing that kind of strategic plan for what are your goals? What are the measurable things that you're doing every week to get there? What is your spiritual walk now? Which means that you need to be meditating. You need to be having an experience every day that puts you back into that frame of mind that you're not just simply waking up and going to work and meeting obligations, that your life is transcended from this and that it's bigger than these things.
Beautiful. So if people want to learn more about your work and explore things further, where would you send them?
Come to mindfulmutiny.com. This is my coaching page. There's information about what I do on there and the packages that I have. And there's a way to schedule a consultation with me. I'd love to just have a free conversation with you and see, what are your needs? What tailors an experience to you that is positive, that is enriching to you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll put the link to mindfulmutiny.com in the show notes so that anyone that's watching or listening to this can have access to it.
Bjorn, thank you so much. I've had a lovely time.
Fantastic. Wish you all the best.
Thank you.